naturally, I mean, I have to confess, I kind of lost it. Because I
Yes.
had the same reaction as you, except that I'm out like 10 grand plus installation fees. So
Yeah.
my anger is extremely, extremely high right now. And to be
Palpable. Yeah.
clear, my anger is not just because I wasted money. I've lost money. I've lost lots more money than this. Running a business, you make mistakes, you lose money, you screw things up, right?
You hire Colton.
You have products that don't work the way that you expected them to. I mean, we lost a ton of money on those Ursa 12K cameras. You don't hear me putting Blackmagic on blast because of it, because at the end of the day, we didn't do our due diligence validating it, and that's our bad. It just didn't end up being as good as we had hoped. This is not that. This is not a product not meeting my expectations, so I'm... This is just a blatantly anti-consumer action. Having it be your policy, your official, actual policy to refuse to provide firmware updates. Okay, so do you know how you're supposed to get them?
How? Do you mail it in or something?
Through a compatible... I believe you actually can mail them in, actually. I don't want to rip them all out of my wall, mail them in, and then put them all back in my wall, though. That is not happening. Especially when the real solution is so easy to provide me the firmware update. So the way it actually works is that you are expected to go get a smart hub that is able to, I don't know, that Jazzco maybe provides the firmware update to, and then updates the switches for you. But here's the thing. Since we shot the video, we've actually done a little bit more work already on this. Step one is that there was literally nowhere within driving distance for me that I could go get a smart home hub and bring it back in order to try this. So they're not terribly accessible. So really what this means is that probably from some integrator, there's going to be some kind of hub that maybe, and Jazzco would not guarantee this, maybe would have newer firmwares that might help me, but they...
but they wouldn't guarantee it because they already shipped you a device that had firmware that was 4 years out of date. So they don't know. Maybe
what version. What version?
Maybe the hub's 8 years out of date.
Because here's the model. What they've basically embraced is the US telecommunications carrier model. Whereas the manufacturer of the device, you write good software with new features. I mean, maybe it's not good. I don't know. I mean, we've seen the level of incompetence here. But you write software, okay? You write software that presumably is helpful. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't bother writing it, okay? And then instead of sending it to the end user's device, you willfully insert smart home controller hub manufacturers as the gatekeepers who get to decide whether you will or won't get updated firmware that has functionality fixes and new features. And making it even worse, you willfully, obstinately refuse to allow end users, who, by the way, can buy your products. I bought them off Amazon. Like I didn't get it. They didn't come from an integrator. So this is a product I can buy and that I can adopt in my Z-Wave with my AEOTech Z-Wave stick and my Home Assistant controller, which is running on a Raspberry Pi right now. So I absolutely can get it and use it, but I cannot update it. I can't use it properly because you will not provide me the firmware update that I need in order for it to actually work. How does this make any sense?
I would bring up right now, like if you're a developer that works for Jazzco and you spend your time making these pieces of firmware that, as far as I can tell by this story, literally no one ever gets to use, I would just make sure that you know that it is a vibrant tech space out there right now, and there are many other jobs you could have, and if you all quit at once, you could all have new jobs very quickly. I don't know how much Jazzco pays, but it's very likely you could even be paid more. You could live pretty much wherever you want. There's tons of different companies that are offering work from home right now. I would take this opportunity for a potential career change. so that more people can use what you work on, and it might be more impactful.
I'm so frustrated right now, and it's one of those things where, like you said, you see the auto completions in Google search because it's just flippin' obvious that if there's new firmware for a device, that you should be able to download it.
This is how like basically everything has worked forever. Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're just, I don't know,
unless
maybe
you're Jasco.
I would say, if I had to guess, I would say that some non-tech savvy executive level individual who doesn't really understand that giving the firmware files to a customer does not give them the source code of the firmware. Like maybe they don't understand the difference between.
And that statement right there is actually why I brought up that like seek a new career thing, because clearly the people leading your company have like no idea what's going on with you, and probably have taken none of your feedback, because I can't imagine a developer not bringing up like, hey, we should just let them have the firmware updates. Like we can even control the pipeline somehow if you want to do it that way, whatever. But like we should let our customers update their own freaking firmware. I can't imagine one of the developers hasn't brought that up. What I can absolutely imagine is whoever came up with this policy just doesn't care at all about what the developers say.
That's the only thing I can think of either. No engineer in their right mind. If I was an engineer, what I would probably suggest is that we not only have the latest firmware or two, but we have a form where you can request even older ones. I wouldn't necessarily say, yeah, you should have an archive of every possible firmware for it. That could be potentially irresponsible. But actually, you know what? With the way that they roll out updates, that's interesting. Maybe you would want to have that, because that's probably the reason that they ship it with such out-of-date firmware, because there are probably smart home hub manufacturers that are running like ancient firmwares as their official platform, and they need to have an earlier one to update from in order to go to that one. So I probably would say like, hey, we should have the last couple, and then as a nuclear option, we should have this like OG ancient one, so that we can point people to it as customer support and say, hey, why don't you try flashing that one, and then you can re-adopt it into your thing. And it'll make its way up to the one that's needed. So I'm at the point now where it's time to decide what to do. There is not an alternative that has a good feeling switch with a motion sensor in it. So if the goal, and like I said, you've been over like the motion sensing, like lights turning on as you walk down the hallway, walk into the bathroom, go into the garage. I mean, it's kind of cool, right?
It's generally quite good. Yeah. The only thing, and this is always my problem with them, the only thing is when if you're just chilling in a room and they turn off. That's the only thing. But yeah, other than that, it's fine. And I will admit, I pressed the buttons sometimes and they felt all right. Yeah.
Yep. The quality of the Switch itself, the actual hardware seems fine. I just need the firmware. And, you know, I feel like a lot of the time I kind of go off the rails and I get really angry about stuff and people don't understand it. Like it might seem like, you know, in a world where so much is going wrong, really, you can't get the latest bells and whistles on your smart light switch. Wow, so out of touch, Linus. But it's not about that. It's not about the magnitude of the grievance. It's about the unnecessariness of the grievance. It's about the shocking stupidity that led to my time and probably countless other people's time being wasted for no
that's what I was going to say is
reason.
In a lot of situations, we bring this up all the time, right? Like if it takes an influencer using their platform in order to get something done, then it's not necessarily a win that thing gets done. It's only a win if the entire process changes.
And that's honestly, I've already told them that's the only outcome that I'll accept. If they say, look, we'll send you an NDA and we'll send you the firmware file, I'm going to send them one of these, because that's not a real solution. The real solution is that they have a download portal on their website for the firmware for their products. That's
or
the
like
only solution.
some way for them to have a pipeline for updating their devices.
I mean, I've seen, well, they have a pipeline. It's just a stupid one with stupid third-party gatekeepers that I want nothing to do with.
I don't mean with some weird hub. I mean like through software or something like that. But
yes.
So what I was going to say is sometimes when you are in this situation, you have to become disproportionately loud, if that makes sense. I'm talking to the audience right now, not you, because I think you get it. But when you run into something like this and you're like, oh, I'm potentially the first person with a large platform or whatever else that has ran into this problem. And it's looking at how this goes through communicating with the company. It's not like they're like, oh, yeah, here, you can have it. We don't have like a public download form, but you can just have it, because that would be fine. Whatever. It's not great, but who cares? You have to be very loud so that actual change happens and they don't just fix it for you.
Yes.
Because that's the actual goal that you want, is you want actual change to happen.
That's exactly it. And so if, honestly, we didn't manage to finish the video was supposed to be kind of a puff piece. Like, it was supposed to be just, hey, Linus and Jake are horsing around for a few hours, like setting up some cool automations and Home Assistant integrations and showing you guys the potential of this like really cool technology that, yes, costs a lot more than a regular dumb switch, but if you were upgrading anyway and you have a Raspberry Pi kicking around, maybe doesn't cost as much more than you thought, and for a couple of key rooms could actually be really cool. Like, the idea was to just show this technology being used in a way that's really practical and makes a ton of sense. And then it turned into this just angry bashing our heads against a brick wall. Why is this happening? And I'm sorry, I don't remember how I started the sentence anymore, but it was so infuriating. Jasco managed to, through their own utter incompetence and or ignorance, turn what should have just been basically a free promo for their product. I wasn't even reviewing it. I was just integrating it into my home and showing cool things it can do, right? They turned that into, now this has to be a multi-part video because I didn't manage to successfully integrate the freaking product, and now I have to find another solution. So they basically just turned an easy W into a giant L. So what do I do now?
Yeah, I don't know. There's still opportunity. I don't know what you do, to be honest. There's still opportunity for Jasco to fix their situation, though.
Well, yeah, they can.
Because it's probably ignorance, like you said, ignorance or incompetence. It's probably ignorance. They're probably not listening to their dev team. This is a big opportunity for hopefully their dev team to go like, hey, this thing that we've probably already talked to you about needs to happen. And they could react and add a download section or just start allowing people to get the files through support tickets or whatever else.
What are the odds? If they're so willfully ignorant that they've maintained this policy up until now, come on. I doubt it. I even asked explicitly. So you make the switch? Yes, we do. So you write the firmware? Yes, we do. But you will not send it to me. No, we will not. In such simple terms, because I even thought as I was on the phone with them, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is one of those things where because it's like branded GE, but Jasco actually makes it. Maybe there's some kind of weirdness where it's like it's someone else's IP and they can't send it up. But the point is just, however far this has to make it up the chain, whoever's making this decision is so far out of date that it has to be willful. Like, you can't possibly be working in the technology industry and manage to not understand why sending a firmware out to your end user is a good idea, unless you just sit at your desk, la 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 la, every time an engineer comes in and tries to talk to you. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I mean it's a horrible experience, and we've seen a lot of home automation brands go down. I think you mentioned that earlier in the show. It makes sense. It's even at this point, I would say it's a relatively young space.
Oh, for
So it
sure.
makes
You're
sense.
absolutely right.
So yeah, I mean, there's an absolute opportunity for Jazco to just fail as a company if they don't become more. I wouldn't even say that's user centric. I was going to say if they don't become more user centric, but I don't think that's even fair. It's like if they become less oppressive to their users, because forcing people to have stuff that's like a brand new product that's 4 years out of date is like not okay. Like, and I don't know how else to say that. So they just need to figure it out and make sure that that's not like allowed to be a thing. That's it.
So what I could do, Luke, is I could go out and I could buy a compatible hub. I could adopt all the switches with that hub.
Well, maybe, because you don't know if that hub is going to have the latest firmware or not.
That's true. Okay, but I could try that.
You could try it. Okay, fair.
I could painstakingly adopt over 100 switches to my new hub.
Beautiful.
Update Fantastic. The firmware. It is possible that I could have that Z-Wave hub act as like a daughter Z-Wave controller device for Home Assistant. We don't know that for sure. We haven't explored that. If that's not possible, then what I could do is I could, whatever the opposite of adopt is, I could disconnect the switches painstakingly from that hub. And then I could go around and adopt them all with their new flashed firmware back into Home Assistant. I could do that. But unless we can use that new hub as a daughter hub, then anytime I needed to update the firmware again in the future, which as I think it appears to be being actively developed still, I would probably have to jump through those same hoops again, meaning that is not an acceptable solution. So here's what I'm leaning to. Here's what I'm leaning toward. I wish to have motion sensing in my house, particularly for hallways, stairwells, bathrooms, utility spaces. It's been really nice, actually. It's really cool. The only way to do that is to get a separate device. I'll have to get a separate motion sensor, and I'll have to get that embedded into the wall. I have talked to my general contractor. It looks like they can do it. They can just cut a hole next to the switches and then just kind of work around the back to tap into the electrical wiring in the box, hook up a 5-volt power supply. There's one from AEO Tech. It's like a 7-in-1 or something like that. Moisture, humidity. Oh, those are the same thing. Whatever. The point is it does temperature, UV, like a whole bunch of stuff. Put that next to all the light switches, serving essentially the same function. But at that point, I wouldn't have to have these Jazco switches anymore. And the Jazco switches, even just using them as dumb switches, is an inconvenience. There is a way, without doing it through software, which doesn't work, remember, because the old buggy firmware, it doesn't work. There is a way to turn off the motion sensor and just have them work as a dumb switch, but you have to pull off the plate, and like there's a third button that you have to like press and hold for a certain amount of time.
They're not that good. They're not better than just like a normal dumb switch, in my opinion.
No, they're not.
I would prefer a normal dumb switch if it was a dumb switch. Yeah.
So the way
it feels good, but like we're being realistic with how good it can be while still packing all this other stuff in it.
Yes. So what I think will happen is I am going to try to find a sponsor, maybe someone with, an attitude, chip on their shoulder, someone a little snarky, and I'm going to try and find a sponsor who's like, yeah, we want to be part of this. And I think that through a combination
you're making home automation switches now?
Through a combination, no. Through a combination of sponsor dollars and just plain eating it, I think what we'll do is we'll just rip every Jazco switch out of the wall,
all out.
Replace them with someone who has. We'll work through the community. I know Jake's already doing some research. Replace them with someone who has a way more consumer-friendly approach to firmware, and just have it do a follow-up video that's just a big FU. Now, Jazco can stop this, but the only way to stop this is not to appease me. It's not about me at this point. The only way to stop this is to fix your policies, is to educate
100%.
yourselves internally about what firmware updates are, what the potential implications of sending out firmware updates are, and learning that there's only one possible outcome to this lesson that you're learning, and that is that you need to support your products through firmware updates that are readily available to your paying customers. Fair and, yes, Innovelli, that's the word I was looking for. They've been quite involved in the Home Assistant community and would very likely be on board. Yes, Innovelli has actually reached out to us already. In fact, they were the number 2 choice, and the only reason we went with the GE Jasco ones was for the motion sensor, because I didn't want to put those additional freaking holes in my wall for separate motion sensors, which now ultimately it looks like I'm going to have to do anyway. Innovelli actually reached out to us and said, hey, we know you're looking for smart switches. We'd be potentially willing to work with you on firmware updates and like build new features for you if you require them. So basically, I made a mistake. Jake pushed hard for the Innovelli switch.
That's the other end of the spectrum. That's fantastic.
And I really wanted the motion sensor, but like there's also stuff on the Jasco switches that I don't even know if the new firmware is going to fix because I can't get it and I can't try it. Like for example, we want to operate it without a fade on and fade off. There is a parameter that we did get working for adjusting the speed of the fade on and fade off. But in some rooms, like for example, in my son's room, he wants to use a smart bulb. He wants to use like one of those Yi lights so that he can have like RGB lights in his room. And I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. But smart bulbs don't always play well with smart switches. And one of the reasons is that smart switches tend to do have like fade on, fade off, or dimming functionalities that are not that don't work well with a smart bulb. Now, that doesn't mean I want to put a dumb switch in there, because if I wanted to do something like turn off all the lights in the house, I'd like to have the switch be controlled without having the Yeelight app on my phone tied into Home Assistant. I'd like to have a minimal number of apps and tie-ins required to have basic functionality. So what I wanted was the ability to set the switch to have an instant on, instant off mode that you can activate. I don't know if the Jasco one has that, but in Innovelli, if they don't, well, I'd be able to say, hey, here's what I want. Here's why I want it. Here's why it'd be beneficial to your entire community, not just to me. And they expressed interest in working with us on that. So I think that's the update. Guys, you're still going to want to watch the video just because it is such an emotional roller coaster. Like, I can't express. We were really pressed for time that day. We were trying to get the smart lighting video done and the HVAC update one done. And then this just completely threw a wrench in what was supposed to be a simple shoot where we adopted some switches, showed some cool automations, and called it a freaking day. And just,
this is one of those situations where having labs like running and having the labs website would be pretty cool, because I'm sitting here thinking like I want to make sure, because this is a terrible thing for someone to run into, especially if they don't have a platform, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't want people to run into it. But if you title the YouTube video like, you will have firmware problems if you buy Jasco switches, that's just like not really going to go very well. So because it's just very boring of a title. So I want to make sure that it would get traction with people that might be like, should I buy this switch? And I would hope that this content would come up. But having the labs website, you could absolutely do something like that.
Yeah. I'm excited, man. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, and thanks to DreamHost for sponsoring this week's clips. DreamHost offers premium WordPress websites and hosting at affordable prices with free, award-winning 24/7 customer support. Check out DreamHost's current deals using the link below.